Thank you, Thibaut. Thanks again, Fusion Science, for inviting me to be a part of the Sonoma Vintage Report. Like Thibaut said, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the results of the year in terms of sugar load, and specifically for the area of Sonoma. We had a very interesting year that it doesn't show too much in average, but when we go specifically into the details, we're going to see that we have some particular cases that are worth mentioning. The information that I'm sharing about the sugar load is coming from a tool that we have that is called Diastem, that measures the evolution of berry volume and sugar synthesis in time. If you remember the classic curves of berry growth, we know that we have two big jumps in volume in berry size, and the first one is mainly due to cell multiplication and a little bit of cell expansion. Then it's, oh, sorry, I'm too low. Is that okay? Okay, sorry. Okay, we have a moment, we have a plateau where it's verizon happens, and secondly, we have a second jump in volume and berry growth that is mainly due to sugar synthesis and cell expansion. In this second phase of the growth of the berry, we're measuring volume, and we are combining that information with the concentration of sugar that we evaluate from a sample of berries. By combining these two parameters, we are able to have the sugar quantity per berry. The sugar quantity per berry that we will analyze once a week is going to give us a curve, a theoretical curve, that is going to start actively loading sugar for a period that can change depending on the conditions of the year. At a certain point, we're going to see a stop in the sugar synthesis. And after this, if we keep measuring a concentration of sugar in bricks, in potential alcohol, in whatever unit we want to measure it, we're going to see that any change that we have, any increase on the bricks, is going to be due to changes in volume, concentration, and loss of water. In general, from these curves, what we're comparing year to year and what makes us take information, it's all these 5 points here and a 6 point in the second slide that provides with valuable information to compare year to year the data that we're seeing. From here, we can evaluate how long the sugar synthesis lasts. We can evaluate the moment of the sugar load stop, that it's a parameter that we use to announce the start of ripening. Third, we measure the speed of the sugar synthesis that can give us valuable information about the balance of the plant, the balance of the vineyards that we're measuring. And finally, and not least important, we evaluate the maximum amount of sugar that is synthesized at this point, or the bricks, for the same reason. The amount of sugar that we evaluate at this moment is going to be a parameter of quality. We compare that year to year, and we know that if we reach a minimum amount of sugar, we most likely will have all these secondary metabolites that are polyphenols, like color and tannins and a good structure, and mainly aromas. So remember that, because it's gonna be connected to what we're seeing this year. I think the animations are a little off here, but that's the typical curve. This, again, the theoretical curve, and we have a moment in period 4 that is going to affect the quality that we're going to see at the end, and in period 5 that Thibaut was mentioning before, we're going to see the color accumulation, but also the aromatic evolution of the grapes. So normally, just going to go quickly. Normally, we will see that after this sugar load stop, we have a normal evolution in aromas that is going to be this very simple model that is going to go from vegetal to fresh fruit to neutral, ripe, and overripe fruit, right? Nothing too crazy about that. When we have enough sugar, when we have a good photosynthesis, we most likely will have all these aromas later. And the date of the picking, this day D plus or days after sugar load, it's something that we can use and compare year to year, because not every year we're going to be picking at the same moment, especially if we are, sorry about the animations there. It's not going to be the same if we are measuring bricks. So just a quick example on how bricks and sugar load, it's actually giving us different information. We may have two different blocks, A and B. And these two blocks, they synthesize at different rates, they stop at different moments, and they have a different amount of sugar at the end of the sugar load stop. In that case, block A is going to stop a little later with less sugar, right? Block B is going to be earlier and with a higher concentration of sugar, but later on, by loss of volume and concentration, they may reach the same bricks, and they may be peaked at the same time and considered as similar blocks, when in reality, all these metabolites that we're looking for are different. And we're going to have two different peaking dates, two different ripening times, and two different qualities. And this is important to remember because, like we said before, we do have a modelization that we're doing that is helping us predict what are the windows that we're going to be seeing. And in this case, we have, for example, block B, if you remember from the slide before, we have, too low? Sorry. Okay, from block B, for example, with a moderate water restriction, that is something that we are always looking to have smaller berries and a better ratio, we will have this normal evolution where we have fresh, ripe fruit over ripe fruit. So really the picking point should be connected to your winemaking goals and what you're looking for the wine. When we have a situation like block A, where we didn't reach that minimum quality that we're looking, that minimum amount of sugar that we need, we may have two case scenarios. One with no water restriction, early water restriction, and another one with water stress. When we don't have a restriction, the aromatic evolution is going to be different. We're going to go from veggie to fresh fruit, but still kind of diluted on the palate, so not too concentrated, to neutral, and later on degraded fruit. It's what we call dry veggie, dry tannins, material that is more, it's a little harder to work with. When we don't reach the minimum potential and we have some stress, the situation is totally different, and it will go from veggie to directly dry, hay, diluted, and dry tannins. So really, again, we're simplifying a model, but we need to keep in mind that we need a minimum amount of sugar at this point. So any event that we have that affects photosynthesis will have an impact on the final quality. And that brings us to what we saw this year in Sonoma County. Looking at the average, we couldn't find any obvious detail to mark. Maybe some heterogeneity during Verizon, a little later start of the sampling, that is obviously because we start sampling at the end of Verizon. But in terms of when I tried to overlap 2019, 18, 17, in obvious ways, there wasn't really a big difference. When we're, again, looking at the average results for Cabernet Sauvignon, again, Cabernet is a very specific variety that is very sensitive to heat waves, so that's why I like to work on this variety. We see that in average, we are very close to what it was last year. We had a good synthesis at the moment of the sugar load stop. We had a good speed. The time of the load was higher than a month. That's always good because the more time we have, the more sugar we're going to get to synthesize. And the average sugar load stop was around the 29th of August. Yeah, but the one thing that caught my attention was the lower bricks that we saw compared to other years. It was actually kind of close to 2015, where in these years we had big events of stress and very marked heat waves. This year it didn't feel like it. So we started thinking about what could be the cause of these lower bricks. Putting together a comparative of the average results of Sonoma of 2019 versus all the other years, we see that in terms of time, we're kind of close to the average of all these 10 years. But in terms of bricks, we see that we are reaching a much lower amount of sugar at the end of the sugar load stop. So in terms of quality, it means it's going to be affected. Looking at volume, we could expect, and we were hoping to see maybe an explanation that was connected and linked to the volume because we saw bigger berries. And in average, we were very, very close to what it was last year, where we have a year that it was really big in terms of the size of the berries that we were having. The loss of volume from maximum peak until the last analysis was less than 7%, which is not that much. It's normal. It means it's a good situation. We're not, like in 2017, losing almost 20% of our volume. So really, very bigger berries or dilution could not explain the reason why we're seeing this Brix so low. In general, so again, we had a good condition, a good load, good speed, a good time, a good period overall, but lower Brix. So again, I think, looking at the average, it's always kind of tricky, because unless the effect of the year is really marked, it could be leading us to tell us it was a wonderful year, when in reality we had some issues. So we moved into what could be the explanation, and we found out that the distribution of the blocks and how did they stop and how was the global behavior of all the blocks that we follow, we found that a nice amount of them stop at what we call high potential. A part of them stop in medium potential, and a big chunk of blocks stop in what we call slow ripening, weak potential, or it could be a sign that these blocks, they had some sort of blockage. So this is not normal. When we are comparing 2018 to 2019, we see that, for example, the distribution in 2018 was way lower in terms of these struggling blocks. It was only 12%. And this year, we were almost at 40% of the blocks that were really struggling and didn't make it. So we had two very clear types of behavior in terms of sugar synthesis. And this was what we call slow ripening, and then good load that can lead to medium or high potentials. For the blocks that were in slow ripening, these 40% of the blocks that we analyzed, we found that during period 4, the conditions really affect the synthesis, and we ended up with a shorter load with lower amount of potential alcohol or lower amount of sugar. And these blocks were really affected by these conditions that Thibaut was mentioning before. So these higher VPD, these events of heat waves that really hit at the time, affected and brought us into this stop around the 24th of August with 9.6 average of potential alcohol. So very clear how the weather situation, even though we had globally not a condition that was super stressful, affect these blocks and had an impact on a larger amount of them. Here I have just a real life example of a block that we follow, and we have a very good start. In the right, you're gonna see that's the speed of synthesis. We reach almost 10 milligrams of sugar per berry per day, which is really good. And then after this, it was blocked and nothing else happened, and then the Brix were stalled. And that was a common comment that I hear this harvest, like my Brix are really not moving. The aromas are not there, and in a lot of blocks, I'm just waiting. Yeah, so that's a classic situation. And secondly, for what would be a behavior of photosynthesis of a good sugar load block, we have this example of a larger period 4. So we have at least until September 11th for synthesis, which a much higher rate for a good block at 12.7% of potential alcohol. So these blocks were able to overcome that situation, that stressful situation initially, and were able to finish the period of load and end up with a higher potential at the end. Again, 2 examples of what real life would look like. We have a high potential block and a medium potential block. In the high potential block, we see now that we have 1 extra week, almost 10 days more of load, and that 1 week can make a full difference in terms of quality and how we're gonna classify those wines. So again, going back into what could explain this situation, we know that lack of early stress maybe was the source of a higher sensibility later on during period 4 to have these blocks really not being able to overcome that situation and entering in stress, even though in average it wasn't that obvious. We did have a higher VPD, we did have more events of heat waves, and at the end, that affected photosynthesis, and for a large number of blocks, it had an impact on the final quality. So, that's it. I don't know if you have any questions. So clear, good.